What if the person who was supposed to protect you was the one who wanted you dead? At just 9 years old, Emily lost everything: her father, her home, and the only life she had ever known. In the dead of night, she was dragged from a car and abandoned in a dark, rotting landfill, left to die among the discarded and forgotten. But fate had other plans. 13 years later, she returns. No longer the helpless child her stepmother threw away, but a woman with a mission. And this time, she's the one knocking on the door. Stay with me until the end to uncover the chilling truth behind this shocking betrayal. Dear family, which country are you watching from? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to support us. Now let's get started. The Texas sky stretched dark and endless, the city lights of Houston fading into the distance as the black sedan rumbled down the deserted road. The cold December air seeped through the cracks of the car doors, but the chill that ran through Emily Carter's body had nothing to do with the weather. She was only 9 years old, but she could feel something was wrong, very wrong. The car smelled of Victoria's overpowering perfume, sweet, artificial, suffocating. Emily sat curled up in the back seat, her small hands clutching a teddy bear worn with love and time, a gift from her father on her last birthday. The bear was soft against her fingers, but it offered no comfort now. Not when her father was gone, not when her world had been shattered. Victoria drove in silence, her manicured fingers tapping against the steering wheel. The woman had barely spoken since the funeral, aside from empty words of sympathy whispered in front of guests, words that felt as fake as the crocodile tears she had wiped away with a silk handkerchief. Emily swallowed hard. "Where are we going?" Victoria didn't answer. She kept driving, her gaze fixed ahead, lips pressed together in an unreadable expression. Emily hugged her teddy bear closer. The road stretched on, the streetlights growing sparse. They were leaving the city. The weight in her stomach turned to dread. "Victoria?" She tried again, her voice small. "I want to go home." Victoria let out a sharp breath, as if the words annoyed her. "Home?" She scoffed. "You don't have a home anymore." Emily's chest tightened. "But your father is dead." Victoria's voice was colder than the night air creeping into the car. "And I'm done playing babysitter." The words hit Emily like a slap. She had cried herself to sleep every night since her father, Daniel Carter, died in that awful car accident. But hearing Victoria say it so bluntly, so cruelly, made it feel real in a way that crushed her little heart all over again. Tears welled in her eyes. "Daddy said you'd take care of me." Victoria laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Your father was a fool. He actually thought I loved him, thought I'd waste my life raising his little brat." She glanced at Emily in the rearview mirror, her blue eyes glinting with something almost like satisfaction. "But he's gone now, and I don't need you anymore." Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the teddy bear tighter. "But where are we?" The car jerked to a sudden stop, throwing her forward against the seatbelt. Her heart pounded as she looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere. The air was thick with an awful stench, a mixture of rotting food, chemicals, and decay. Emily had never smelled anything like it before, but she knew what it meant. The towering mounds of trash, the distant sound of rats scurrying, the eerie silhouettes of rusted abandoned cars. It was a landfill, a place where things were thrown away. Victoria unbuckled her seatbelt and turned in her seat. "Get out!" Emily's breath hitched. What?" Victoria's expression darkened. "I said get out!" Panic clawed up Emily's throat. "No, please, I don't want to stay here. I want to go home." But Victoria was already reaching across the seat, yanking the car door open. Before Emily could react, cold fingers closed around her arm and dragged her out. She tumbled onto the ground, the rough gravel scraping her hands and knees. The smell of garbage was suffocating. Tears blurred her vision as she scrambled to her feet. "Please, Victoria, don't leave me here. I promise I'll be good. A hard shove sent her falling back into the dirt. She gasped, pain shooting through her tiny frame. Above her, Victoria loomed like a shadow, her high heels sinking slightly into the mud. "Listen to me, you little pest," she hissed. "You're nothing to me. Your father is gone, and as far as I'm concerned, so are you." Emily sobbed, crawling toward her, reaching for the hem of her coat like a lifeline. Please. Victoria kicked her hand away. Then, without another word, she turned back to the car and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life. Emily scrambled to her feet, running after the vehicle as it rolled forward. No, don't go, please. I'll do anything. Please come back. Her tiny legs struggled against the uneven ground. She chased the car, barefoot and desperate, as it sped away, leaving her in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Victoria, she screamed, come back. But the car was gone. The only sounds left were the distant howls of stray dogs and the rustling of something moving in the garbage piles. Emily stood there, her chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the ground, clutching her teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping her from breaking apart. The night stretched around her, endless and terrifying. And deep inside, in a way that no 9-year-old should ever have to feel, Emily knew that no one was coming to save her. The night stretched on, endless and unrelenting. Emily sat curled in a tight ball beneath a rusted metal sheet, her fingers gripping the worn fabric of her teddy bear. The cold bit at her skin, her thin dress offering little protection against the freezing wind that howled through the landfill. The stench of rotting food, chemicals, and decay filled her nostrils, making her stomach twist in nausea. But it wasn't the cold or the smell that scared her most. It was the silence. Silence meant she could hear every small sound in the darkness. The rustling of rats scurrying between heaps of trash. The distant barking of stray dogs, hungry and restless. And worst of all, the occasional low, guttural noises of men's voices. Strangers who roam the landfill at night, searching for things to take or people to prey on. She held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the pile of discarded junk, willing herself to disappear. If she stayed very still, if she made no noise, maybe the night would pass without finding her. Hours crawled by, each second stretching into eternity. The cold seeped into her bones. Her hands and feet went numb. Her body trembled violently, but she barely noticed anymore. She was too exhausted, too broken. Her father was dead. Victoria had left her here. No one was coming to save her. At some point, her eyes grew too heavy to keep open. She didn't remember falling asleep. She only remembered waking up to the feeling of a hand on her shoulder. Emily jerked awake with a gasp, her body instinctively flinching away. Panic surged through her chest. The last time someone had touched her, it was Victoria throwing her into the dirt. Easy, sweetheart. I'm not gonna hurt you, a soft voice said. Emily blinked against the morning light. A woman knelt before her, silhouetted by the pale gray dawn. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, her kind brown eyes filled with something Emily hadn't seen in days. Concern. The woman pulled off a faded wool coat and draped it over Emily's shaking shoulders. My name's Linda, she said gently. What's yours? Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her voice had been stolen by the cold, by the fear, by the overwhelming truth that she had no one left to say her name. Linda sighed, rubbing warmth into Emily's frozen hands. You don't have to talk yet, baby. You just gotta come with me. You can't stay out here alone. Emily wanted to say no. She wanted to shrink back into her hiding place and disappear forever. But something in Linda's voice, something in the way she looked at her, made Emily hesitate. She wasn't like Victoria. She wasn't like the cold, uncaring faces at her father's funeral. Linda felt safe. Emily nodded just barely. Linda smiled. That's my girl. Let's get you somewhere warm. She helped Emily to her feet, wrapping an arm around her fragile shoulders as they made their way through the landfill. Emily stumbled over the uneven ground, her legs weak from hunger and cold. But Linda never let go of her. As they walked, Emily realized that the landfill wasn't just piles of garbage. It was a world of its own. Makeshift shelters were scattered between the mountains of trash, huts built from wood, rusted metal, and old tarps. Smoke curled from small fires where people huddled together for warmth. Children, some younger than her, ran barefoot through the dirt, their faces smeared with grime. Emily's wide eyes took in everything. These weren't just homeless people. They were a forgotten community, a world no one cared about. Linda led her to a small shack made of plywood and a torn blue tarp, pushing aside the curtain that served as a door. Inside, the space was cramped but clean, a tiny cot against the wall, a few blankets piled in the corner, and a pot of something warm simmering over a small fire. "You're safe here," Linda told her. "I've been looking after kids like you for a long time." Emily sat down on the cot, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Safe. She had almost forgotten what that word felt like. Before she could process any of it, a boy appeared in the doorway. He was about her age, maybe a little older. His face streaked with dirt, his dark hair messy and tangled. He had a scraped-up knee and a small rip in his oversized hoodie, but his green eyes were sharp and filled with something Emily couldn't quite name. Curiosity. "Who's this?" the boy asked, tilting his head. "She's new," Linda answered. "Be nice, Jake." The boy, Jake, plopped down on the floor, crossing his arms over his chest. "You got a name?" Emily hesitated, her throat still raw. Jake studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "It's okay if you don't want to talk. I didn't either when I first got here." Emily looked at him, really looked at him. There was something about him, something tough but not unkind. Jake pulled something out of his hoodie pocket and tossed it onto her lap, a half-eaten candy bar. Emily stared at it. "For you," Jake said. "You look hungry." She hesitated, then reached out with shaking fingers and took it. Jake grinned. Guess that means we're friends now." Emily didn't know what to say, so she just took a small bite of the candy bar, the chocolate melting on her tongue. It was the first kind thing anyone had done for her since her father died. And for the first time since that horrible night, something inside her cracked open just a little, a tiny flicker of warmth in the coldest part of her heart. The days in the landfill blurred together, each one a battle for survival. Emily quickly learned that this place had no mercy for the weak. Hunger gnawed at her stomach constantly. The food Linda managed to scrape together, stale bread, scraps salvaged from discarded grocery bags, sometimes a steaming bowl of soup made from whatever she could find, was never enough. The cold, too, was relentless, sinking deep into Emily's bones, making her shiver beneath the thin blankets she and Jake shared at night. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the fear. The landfill was not a safe place, especially for children. Strangers drifted in and out, some desperate, some dangerous. Emily had quickly learned to stay close to Jake and Linda, to avoid the wrong kind of attention. There were nights when men's voices echoed in the darkness, arguments turning violent over scraps of food or stolen belongings, and if someone disappeared from the landfill, no one asked questions. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Emily sat beside Jake near a small, crackling fire. The flames flickered, casting warm light on their tired faces, but the air still held the sharp bite of winter. Jake tore apart a piece of bread, stale and dry, and handed half to Emily. "Eat slow," he warned. "Makes it last longer." Emily took a tiny bite, letting the rough crumbs dissolve on her tongue. "You ever get used to it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Jake shrugged, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "The hunger?" He chewed for a moment, then swallowed. "Yeah, kinda. But you never stop wanting more." Emily knew he wasn't just talking about food. She pulled her knees to her chest, staring at the dark mountains of trash that surrounded them. "How long have you been here?" Jake leaned back on his hands, looking up at the sky. "Since I was 6. My mom dropped me off, said she'd be right back." He let out a small, bitter laugh. "That was 4 years ago." Emily's fingers tightened around the hem of her tattered sweater. "I'm sorry." Jake shook his head. "Don't be. I stopped waiting." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "You should stop waiting too. No one's coming." Emily swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. She wanted to say you don't know that, but the words felt like a lie, because deep down she did know. Victoria had made sure of it. Jake nudged her shoulder. "But hey," he said, forcing a grin, "you've got me now." Emily glanced at him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she thought she'd lost. Trust. Jake wasn't like Victoria. He wasn't like the people at the funeral, pretending to care while looking through her father's estate paperwork. Jake meant what he said, and in a place where people vanished without a trace, that meant everything. The days passed, and little by little Emily adapted. Jake showed her how to find food in places most people wouldn't think to look. The back alleys of restaurants where bags of expired but edible goods were tossed away. The forgotten crates behind supermarkets where dented canned goods were discarded. Rule number 1, Jake told her one night as they crouched behind a fast food dumpster. Never take the stuff on top. Emily frowned, glancing at the greasy burger wrapper closest to her. Why not? Jake smirked. Because the freshest stuff is always buried underneath. He reached in, his small hands expertly pulling out a still-wrapped sandwich, and tossed it to her. Emily caught it, eyes wide. It's real food. Jake unwrapped one for himself, taking a big bite. Welcome to survival, Carter. Emily smiled, a real smile, the first in weeks, and took a bite of her own. But it wasn't just food Jake taught her to find. He showed her how to tell which parts of the landfill were safe, where the ground was stable, where the bigger rats usually hid, which areas to avoid after dark. He taught her how to run when she had to, how to stay hidden when she couldn't, and most importantly, he taught her never to give up. People like us, Jake said one night, staring at the stars through a gap in the tarp above their shelter. We don't get second chances. No one gives us anything. We got to take it for ourselves. Emily hugged her teddy bear close, the once soft fur now worn down from too many restless nights. What do you mean? Jake's fingers toyed with a small, battered football, its edges scuffed from years of use. I mean, I won't be here forever. His voice held something rare. Hope. One day I'm gonna make it big. Football, maybe. I'll get signed to a team, make more money than I know what to do with. Emily turned her head toward him. You really think you can? Jake's green eyes burned with determination. I know I can. Emily swallowed, looking back at the stars. And then what? Jake turned onto his side, resting his head on his arm. Then I come back for you. Emily's breath caught. Jake grinned, nudging her with his elbow. What? You think I'd leave my best friend in this place? Emily didn't know what to say. No one had ever made her a promise before. Jake reached out, tapping the nose of her teddy bear. You want a real home, right? Emily nodded slowly. Then hold on. His voice softened. I'll get us out of here, one way or another. Emily closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the wind outside, the distant laughter of other kids huddled around fires. For the first time since she had been thrown away, she let herself believe, even just for a moment, that maybe the future wasn't just something to fear. The morning arrived like any other. Gray skies, damp air, and the distant hum of the city beyond the landfill's borders. Emily had grown used to the routine. Wake up to the bitter cold, scavenge for food, and spend the day surviving in a place where no one cared if you lived or died. But today, something felt different. She noticed it the moment she sat up on the thin mattress she shared with Jake. The air was too still, as if the landfill itself was holding its breath. Then in the distance, voices. Strange voices. Emily bolted upright. Beside her, Jake stirred, rubbing his eyes. You hear that? She whispered. Jake sat up, listening. A moment later, his expression darkened. Outsiders! He jumped to his feet, peering through the ripped tarp that served as their shelter's door. Emily scrambled beside him, her pulse quickening as she caught sight of clean suits, polished shoes, and cars that didn't belong in a place like this. A group of social workers, escorted by a handful of men in expensive overcoats, walked carefully through the dirt and debris, their noses crinkled at the stench, their eyes darting warily at the makeshift homes. And leading them all was a tall man with neatly combed silver hair, his suit crisp despite the filth surrounding him. Who's that? Emily whispered. Jake squinted. Rich guy. She frowned. How do you know? Jake smirked. Rich people all have the same look. Like they ain't never been hungry a day in their lives. The man, Richard Marshall, turned to one of the social workers with a practiced sigh. I wish my wife could be here, he said, shaking his head. But she's in New York doing amazing work with underprivileged communities. Emily barely noticed the words. She was too busy watching the social workers scanning the children. Something inside her tightened. They're looking for kids, Jake muttered. They're adopting. Emily turned to him sharply. You don't know that. Jake shot her a look. Why else would they be here? A woman in a navy blazer stepped forward, her clipboard in hand. She called out, We're looking for children who may be interested in finding a home. If anyone here is willing to come with us, please step forward." Silence. The landfill kids knew better than to trust strangers in fancy clothes. They had learned that promises of a better life didn't always mean what they seemed. Emily tightened her grip on her threadbare sweater. Then beside her, Jake moved. Her stomach dropped as he stepped forward. The social workers noticed him immediately. A young boy, thin but strong, his sharp green eyes filled with something they rarely saw here: confidence. Emily grabbed his arm. "Jake, what are you doing?" Jake didn't look at her. "I told you, Carter, I'm getting out of here." Her heart clenched. "But you said—" "I know what I said," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. He glanced at her then, just for a second. "I'll come back." But Emily knew better. No one ever came back. A social worker approached, giving Jake a once-over before nodding to the others. "We'll take him." Another worker handed him a small backpack, clearly meant for a child they had expected to bring. Jake stuffed his few belongings inside: a hoodie, a couple of old comic books, his battered football. Then he turned to Emily. She was frozen in place, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'll come back for you." The words cut through her like glass. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But as she watched him walk away, his sneakers kicking up dirt, his figure getting smaller and smaller, she felt that last fragile thread of hope snap. And deep down she knew Jake was gone, and she was alone again. The first thing Jake noticed was the silence. Not the chaotic kind he had grown used to in the landfill. The kind filled with rustling rats, distant shouting, and the wind howling through broken structures. This was a different silence, the kind that pressed against his ears like a thick, suffocating fog. The house, no, the mansion, was too big, too polished, too cold. His sneakers barely made a sound against the polished marble floors as he followed the butler up the long, winding staircase. His clothes, still worn, still smelling faintly of smoke and dirt, felt out of place against the pristine white walls and extravagant chandeliers. It didn't feel real. This wasn't his world, and yet it was now supposed to be. Richard Marshall had barely been around since the adoption. He had spoken to Jake briefly on the first night, his voice warm but distant. "We're going to take good care of you here," he had said, placing a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "You're going to have everything you need: a home, an education, a future." Then he had handed Jake off to the house staff and disappeared into his office. His new mother, however, was always there. Victoria Marshall was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that belonged on magazine covers, with sharp features and perfectly styled blonde hair. Her words were sweet, her smile polished, but there was something about her that made Jake's stomach twist. On the second morning in the house, she sat across from him at the long dining table, a gold-trimmed cup of coffee resting in her manicured hands. "Jake," she said, tilting her head slightly, her red lips curving into something that almost looked like concern. "That's not really a proper name for someone in this family, is it?" Jake froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, his appetite vanishing. She cut him off with a soft chuckle. "No need to be nervous, darling. It's just, well, names matter. They shape who we are. And you, my dear, have a brand new life ahead of you." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You don't have to be Jake anymore." He stared at her, the words sinking into his bones. Jake had been a fighter. Jake had learned how to survive. Jake had made a promise to go back. But now, here in this vast, empty mansion, he was something else. Victoria reached across the table, gently tapping her manicured nails against his hand. "How about Brandon?" she suggested smoothly. The name felt foreign, wrong, like an ill-fitting suit, but something in Victoria's gaze told him that it wasn't really a question. Jake, no, Brandon, nodded slowly. Victoria's smile widened. Victorious. The days passed, turning into weeks. The landfill felt like a dream, slowly slipping away, fading at the edges, turning hazy. Brandon was given new clothes, expensive ones. He was taught how to speak properly, how to sit up straight, how to smile the way Victoria wanted him to smile. The world he had come from, the one with Emily, with Linda, with nights spent staring at the stars through holes in the tarps, was slipping further and further away. Victoria made sure of it. "Why dwell on the past, darling?" she said one evening as she ran a gentle hand through his hair. "You were saved from that awful place. You should be grateful." At first he fought against it. At night he clutched his old football tightly under the soft blankets, whispering Emily's name into the darkness, reminding himself that he had promised to go back for her. But days turned into months. Months turned into years. And slowly the memories stopped keeping him up at night. He stopped whispering her name. He stopped thinking about the landfill. Because in this world, the one Victoria had built for him, Jake Carter didn't exist anymore. There was only Brandon Marshall. The night Emily left the landfill, it didn't feel real. She kept waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to change their mind, for reality to rip her from this moment, as it had done so many times before. But nothing stopped her. The car rumbled beneath her as they drove away from the only world she had ever known. A world of cold nights, hunger pains, and whispered promises that were never kept. She stared out the window, watching the endless piles of discarded lives shrink in the distance, until they finally disappeared. For the first time in years, she was leaving, really leaving. But part of her still didn't believe it. Her new home was in Chicago, a world away from the filth and suffering she had known. Robert and Susan Walker were nothing like the people from her past. They were older, kind, steady, the kind of people who spoke gently, but with the quiet strength of those who had seen hardship themselves. "We don't expect you to trust us right away," Susan had told her on the first night, "but we'll be here when you're ready." Emily, now Lauren Walker, wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. The warmth of their home, the security of knowing she had a bed, food, and people who cared for her, felt like something borrowed, something that could be taken away at any moment. So for a long time, she didn't unpack her bags. She kept her small belongings close, just in case. But the Walkers never wavered. They were patient. They didn't push. And little by little, Lauren began to believe that maybe this time, she wasn't just someone passing through. School was different. Lauren had always been smart, but she had never belonged anywhere long enough for it to matter. Now, for the first time, she had teachers who noticed her, who encouraged her. But it was in the kitchen where she truly found herself. Susan had been a chef once, years ago before she retired. She taught Lauren the basics, how to season food properly, how to knead dough until it was soft and elastic, how to turn simple ingredients into something special. For Lauren, it was more than just cooking. It was control. It was creation. It was a way to silence the noise of the past. In the kitchen, there was no landfill, no hunger, no nights spent shivering under piles of old newspapers. There was only the smell of butter melting in a pan, the warmth of the oven, the steady rhythm of a knife against the cutting board. And for a while, that was enough. But some things refused to be forgotten. Some nights, she still dreamed of Texas, the landfill, the bitter cold, the hunger that sat like a stone in her stomach, and always, always Jake. She'd wake up in the dark, heart pounding, feeling the weight of his last words pressing against her chest. "I'll come back for you." But he never had. For years, she had tried not to hate him for it. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he had forgotten. Maybe he had never meant it in the first place. But whatever the reason, she was done waiting. The past wasn't finished with her, and she wasn't finished with it. So on the night of her 21st birthday, Lauren made a decision. She would go back. She would find out what had happened to Jake, and she would finally make Victoria Marshall pay for everything she had done, because some promises weren't meant to be broken. Lauren stood outside the towering estate, her heart beat steady despite the storm raging inside her. It had been 13 years. 13 years since she had been thrown away like garbage. 13 years since she had watched Jake disappear into a world she would never reach. Now she was here. She had clawed her way back, built a life, created a future. But none of that mattered until she finished what she came here to do. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. This was about finally taking back the power Victoria Marshall had stolen from her all those years ago. Lauren adjusted her posture, smoothing down the crisp beige blazer she had chosen for the interview. She had spent months preparing for this moment, perfecting her resume, carefully crafting her identity, ensuring there was nothing that could tie her back to Emily Carter. As far as the world was concerned, she was Lauren Walker, a talented young chef from Chicago, trained in some of the best kitchens, now looking for a new challenge. The Marshall estate was just another job. At least that's what they would believe. She forced a calm breath and stepped forward, pushing through the heavy iron gates that led to the mansion. The moment she entered, memories came crashing back. The air smelled expensive, a blend of fresh-cut flowers, polished wood, and wealth. The same suffocating scent she remembered from the night Jake had been taken away. Lauren swallowed hard, burying the past beneath the mask she had perfected. A butler greeted her, his demeanor polite but distant. "Mrs. Marshall is expecting you." Lauren followed him through the massive house, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her ears. And then she saw her, Victoria Marshall, sitting in a sun-drenched parlor, dressed in a cream-colored silk dress that looked as if it had never seen a single wrinkle. Her hair was as perfectly styled as ever, her manicured fingers wrapped around a delicate porcelain teacup. She hadn't changed, not one bit. Lauren clenched her hands into fists at her sides, but her face remained unreadable. Victoria barely glanced up before offering a polite, distant smile. "Ah, you must be Miss Walker." Lauren inclined her head slightly, her voice smooth and professional. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Marshall." The woman studied her, taking in her poised stance, her controlled expression. For a moment, Lauren felt a flicker of tension, but then Victoria simply smiled, setting her teacup down with a faint clink. "Well," she said, "let's see if you're as impressive as your resume suggests." The interview was a performance, and Lauren played her role flawlessly. She spoke about her culinary background, her passion for food, her experiences working under some of the best chefs in Chicago. Victoria listened, nodding occasionally, but her interest remained detached. To her, Lauren was just another servant to be evaluated and discarded if she didn't meet expectations. That was fine, because Lauren wasn't here to impress her, she was here to destroy her. An hour later, the butler led her back toward the entrance. Lauren walked with measured steps, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. But as she passed a side hallway, her gaze flickered toward the staircase leading to the upper floors. And that's when she saw him, Brandon Marshall. Except that wasn't his name. It was Jake. Lauren's breath caught. He stood at the top of the stairs, dressed in a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the polished businessman Victoria had sculpted him into. But it wasn't just his clothes that had changed. His posture was different, rigid, controlled. His face was unreadable, his green eyes sharp and assessing as he studied her from above. For a split second, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Recognition? Number? It couldn't be, because Jake Carter was long gone. Lauren forced herself to keep walking. She wouldn't break character, not yet, not until she had everything she needed. As she stepped through the front doors, the butler's voice followed her. "Mrs. Marshall will be in touch." Lauren didn't turn back. She simply smiled. She had already won. Lauren stood alone in the grand kitchen, the scent of roasted garlic and simmering herbs filling the air. She had spent the last hour preparing dinner for the Marshall family, carefully crafting a menu that would be both impressive and, more importantly, an excuse to linger in the house. The kitchen was pristine, its marble countertops gleaming under the warm glow of the pendant lights. She was in. The first step of her plan had been executed perfectly, but now came the hard part. She reached for a cutting board, steadying her hands, forcing herself to focus. The blade of the chef's knife gleamed as she diced fresh basil with precise, controlled movements. Cooking had always been her refuge, her way of grounding herself when the weight of the past threatened to drown her. But no amount of chopping could prepare her for what happened next. A voice, deep, confident, familiar. "You must be the new chef." Lauren froze. The knife hovered midair as she forced herself to breathe, to move, to keep her hands steady. She lifted her gaze and turned toward the entrance. And there he was, Brandon Marshall. Jake. But he wasn't Jake anymore. He leaned casually against the doorway, completely at ease in this world of wealth and power. Wearing a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the top button undone. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his features sharp, chiseled with time. Gone was the boy who once dug through trash beside her. Gone was the child who had promised to come back. And in his place stood a man who didn't even know she existed. Lauren gripped the counter, willing herself to stay upright as 1,000 memories crashed into her at once. The landfill, the nights spent whispering dreams into the darkness, the hunger, the cold, the way he had held her hand when she was scared. And then his final words, "I'll come back for you." But he never had. He didn't even remember her. Brandon smiled, an easy, charming smile that she had never seen before. Not on Jake, at least. "Sorry if I startled you," he said, stepping further into the kitchen. "I just came to grab a drink." Lauren forced her lips into a polite smile, masking the hurricane inside her. "It's no problem, Mr. Marshall." His brows furrowed slightly, and then he chuckled. "Please, just Brandon." "Mr. Marshall makes me feel like my father." She nodded, still gripping the knife a little too tightly. Brandon walked to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. As he twisted off the cap, he turned back to her, studying her for a second longer than necessary. "I feel like I know you from somewhere." The words hit like a punch to the gut. For a split second, hope flared in her chest. Maybe deep down, he hadn't forgotten. Maybe something inside him still remembered her. But then, Brandon shook his head, laughing lightly to himself. "Weird. I probably just saw you on the staff paperwork." The hope died as quickly as it came. Lauren smiled, but it felt brittle. "Maybe," she murmured. Brandon took a sip of water, still looking at her as if trying to place something that wasn't there anymore. "Well, welcome to the house," he said, flashing another effortless grin. "I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." And just like that, he turned and walked out, leaving Lauren standing in the middle of the kitchen, gripping the counter, forcing herself to swallow the pain rising in her throat. He didn't remember, but she did, and no matter what it took, she would make him remember. The dream started slowly, faint, fragmented images that dissolved the moment Brandon opened his eyes. At first, he dismissed them, just another trick of the mind, meaningless echoes of some forgotten thought. But as the nights passed, the dreams grew stronger. He was somewhere dark, somewhere cold. The air smelled rotten, like old food, and something worse, something decaying. He heard dogs barking in the distance, the low growl of hunger in his stomach. And there was a girl. He couldn't see her face, but he could hear her sobs, the way her voice trembled with fear and betrayal. "Don't leave me. Please, don't leave me." Brandon always woke up drenched in sweat, heart hammering in his chest. The dream would slip through his fingers like water, the details fading before he could grasp them. But the feeling remained, a deep, nagging sense of wrongness, like a door inside his mind had been slammed shut, locking something vital behind it. One evening, Lauren was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for the next morning's pastries, when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew who it was before she even turned around. Brandon had a way of moving, confident, sure of himself. But tonight there was something off. His steps were slower, almost hesitant. Lauren wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and turned to face him. "Couldn't sleep?" Brandon let out a soft, humorless laugh. "I don't sleep much these days." Something in his voice made her pause. He looked different. Not the polished businessman she had come to know, the one who carried himself with the effortless ease of someone who had never had to struggle. Tonight he looked troubled, unsettled, lost. Lauren studied him carefully, keeping her voice casual. "Something on your mind?" Brandon hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I keep having these dreams." Lauren's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. "What kind of dreams?" He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. They don't make sense. But there's this girl. She's crying. He swallowed, his throat working around the words. "She's begging me not to leave her." Lauren's pulse pounded in her ears. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral, even as her entire body screamed at her to react. Brandon let out a bitter laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. It's stupid." "It's not," Lauren said quickly. She saw it, the cracks beginning to form. For so long she had believed that Jake was gone, buried beneath the life Victoria had built for him. But he wasn't gone. He was still in there somewhere, And now, for the first time, he was trying to claw his way back. Lauren took a slow, steady breath. She had to be careful. If she pushed too hard, too fast, he would shut down. So instead, she tilted her head slightly and asked, "Do you think it's just a dream? Or do you think it's something real?" Brandon stared at her, his green eyes stormy with uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted, then quieter. "But I think I abandoned someone." Lauren's throat tightened. She had waited 13 years to hear those words. But now that they were finally spoken, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like a wound being reopened. Because for the first time since she had arrived at this house, she saw it. A flicker of the boy she had once known. A boy who had promised to come back. A boy who had failed. And a boy who, even now, didn't fully understand what he had done. Lauren clenched her fists at her sides, swallowing back the emotions clawing their way to the surface. She couldn't afford to feel. Not yet. Because Brandon didn't need guilt. He needed the truth. And she would make sure he remembered. Lauren sat at the small desk in her dimly lit room, her laptop screen casting a pale glow on her determined face. The Marshall estate was silent, the grandeur of the mansion betraying the darkness hidden within its walls. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, whispering secrets through the night. But inside Lauren's mind, there was only one thought, one mission: the truth. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, piecing together a puzzle that had haunted her for years. For the past week, she had worked tirelessly, contacting an independent private investigator, someone she had found through an old connection in Chicago. Together, they had combed through news archives, financial records, legal documents, anything that could shed light on the death of her father, Daniel Carter. And now the truth was staring back at her from the screen. Lauren's breath hitched. Her eyes scanned the words over and over, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like the whole mansion could hear it. Victoria Marshall had murdered Daniel Carter. It had been disguised as a tragic accident, but the cracks in the story were too obvious to ignore. Conflicting witness statements, missing traffic camera footage from that night, and most damning of all, a life insurance payout that Victoria had received just days after the crash. Lauren's hands shook with fury. She had always known Victoria was a monster, but now she had proof. Still, she needed more, and she knew exactly where to look. Later that night, while the rest of the house slept, Lauren made her move. She had been working in the estate for weeks, watching, waiting, learning Victoria's habits. She knew that every Thursday night, Victoria attended a high-profile charity dinner in downtown Houston, and Richard Marshall was often too exhausted from work to notice much of anything. That meant the house was hers to explore. Heart pounding, she slipped through the hallways, her bare feet silent against the polished wooden floors. The estate was massive, but she knew exactly where she was going: Victoria's private study. Lauren had seen Victoria retreat to that room countless times, always with an air of secrecy. She had watched from the kitchen as delivery men arrived with packages that were never opened in front of anyone else. She had overheard whispered phone calls that abruptly ended when someone entered the room. Now, standing outside the heavy oak door, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the key card she had stolen from the housekeeper's office earlier that day. With a soft beep, the lock released. Lauren pushed the door open and slipped inside. The study was lavish. Dark mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, a massive oak desk dominating the center of the room, and a crystal chandelier casting faint shadows on the walls. But Lauren wasn't here to admire the decor. She moved quickly, knowing she had little time. She went straight to the filing cabinet, scanning the neatly labeled folders. Marshall Family Trust, stock investments, political donations. And then her fingers froze. Confidential legal affairs. Lauren pulled the folder out, her breath catching in her throat as she flipped through the documents inside. What she found made her stomach turn. There were records of illegal adoptions, falsified birth certificates, and massive bribes paid to public officials. Names she recognized: social workers, police officers, even lawyers, all connected to a network of corruption that stretched further than she had imagined. And then, Lauren's hands tightened around the final document. It was a signed confession, not from Victoria, but from a former associate who had died under suspicious circumstances years ago. It detailed everything: how Victoria had orchestrated Daniel Carter's death, how she had manipulated the adoption system to acquire Brandon, and how she had silenced those who got too close to the truth. Lauren felt sick. She wanted to burn the whole place to the ground. But instead, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. She captured every page, every signature, every damning detail. This was bigger than revenge now. This was about justice. Lauren was about to close the folder when she heard footsteps in the hall. Her heart leapt into her throat. She quickly shut the drawer, slipping the folder back into place. The footsteps grew louder. Lauren ducked into the shadows just as the door swung open. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the steady ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Then a voice, calm, sharp, and unmistakable. "I know you're in here." Lauren's breath caught. Slowly, she turned. Victoria stood in the doorway. Her blue eyes glinted like ice, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach them. Lauren had been so careful. So careful. But somehow, Victoria had found her out. Lauren's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to stand tall. If Victoria had expected her to shrink in fear, she was about to be very disappointed. Victoria stepped forward, the soft click of her heels against the polished floor, echoing like gunshots in the silence. My, she mused, tilting her head. "You've grown up quite a bit, Emily." Lauren's stomach clenched at the sound of her real name. So Victoria knew everything, but she refused to let the panic show. "It's Lauren," she said coolly. "Lauren Walker." Victoria let out a slow, mocking laugh. "Oh, darling, you can play pretend all you like, but I know exactly who you are." She gestured lazily toward the desk. "And judging by what you were digging through, I'd say you know quite a bit about me too." Lauren crossed her arms, her heart pounding, but her voice was steady. "More than enough." Victoria smirked. "I suppose I should be flattered. You came all this way just for me?" She placed a hand over her chest in a mock expression of gratitude. "I came for the truth," Lauren shot back, "and now I have it." Victoria's smile faltered for just a second, but then she laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound that sent a chill down Lauren's spine. "The truth?" Victoria purred, taking another slow step forward. "Oh, sweetheart, the truth is whatever I say it is." Lauren refused to back down. "You killed my father." Her voice was firm, accusatory, unshaken. Victoria sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Daniel Carter was a fool. He was weak, and weak men don't last in this world." Lauren's fists clenched. "You staged his accident. You just used Jake to deceive everyone. You controlled him like a puppet. You took everything from us," she said angrily. Victoria's expression darkened. "I gave that boy a better life," she snapped. "Do you really think he'd be who he is today if I hadn't intervened? He was nothing but a stray, surviving on scraps in a pile of garbage. I turned him into someone who matters." Lauren shook her head, disgust twisting in her stomach. "You didn't save him," she spat. "You erased him." Victoria's gaze turned ice cold. "You're in over your head, little girl," she said quietly, her voice dripping with menace. "Walk away while you still can." Lauren stood her ground. "No," she said, her voice stronger than ever. "You don't get to decide how this story ends." Victoria's face twisted with rage. She took another step closer, lowering her voice into a dangerous whisper. "I could make you disappear just as easily as your father." And that was when a voice broke through the tension. "What did you just say?" Both women froze. Lauren's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned. There, standing in the doorway, was Brandon. No, Jake. His face was pale, his wide eyes flickering between Lauren and Victoria. But it wasn't just shock on his face. It was recognition. A sharp, sudden ache pulsed in Jake's head. A memory surfaced, a voice echoing through time, from a past he had long forgotten. "I'll come back for you." He staggered back, his breathing uneven, as flashes of another life flooded his mind. A girl, Emily, crying in the darkness. A landfill, cold and endless. The teddy bear in her arms, clutched like a lifeline. And then, the pool. His own accident, years ago. The memory crashed into him like a wave, his body sinking, water filling his lungs. Victoria's frantic voice as doctors told him he had suffered head trauma. That was when it had all vanished. His childhood, his real name, Emily. His knees nearly buckled as he grabbed the doorframe for support. You, his voice shook. You took everything from me. Victoria straightened, her face quickly shifting into an expression of mock concern. Oh, sweetheart, she crooned. You're confused. We talked about this. Your accident. No, Jake cut her off, his voice raw. He wasn't confused anymore. He remembered every lie, every manipulation, every stolen moment. His hands trembled, but this time, not with uncertainty, with fury. I remember everything. Jake's breath was ragged, his hands clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. The truth burned inside him, a wildfire of betrayal and fury that he could no longer contain. Victoria stepped back, her mask of calm beginning to crack. Jake, she tried, her voice softening into an artificial sweetness. You're upset. I understand. This is a lot to take in, but you need to trust me. Everything I did was for your own good. Jake let out a hollow laugh, cold, bitter, and full of disbelief. My own good? He echoed. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with absolute rage. You stole my life. You took me from the only person who ever truly cared about me. You erased who I was. Victoria flinched, but then her expression hardened. I gave you a better life, she snapped. I turned you into someone who matters. Do you think you would have survived if I left you in that garbage heap? Jake's body tensed, his jaw tightening. I would have had a real life, he shot back. A life where I knew the truth. A life where I wasn't a pawn in your disgusting games. Lauren stepped forward, her voice sharp. And what about my father, she demanded. Did he deserve to die just so you could move up in the world? Did he matter to you at all? Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes flickered, not with remorse, but calculation. She was cornered, and she knew it. Lauren pulled a folder from the desk and threw it onto the floor between them. Here, she said coldly, everything we need to expose you. The murder, the adoption schemes, the fraud. You left a trail, Victoria. And guess what? We're not the only ones who know. Victoria's head snapped up. Jake watched as the first sign of real panic crossed her face. Lauren smiled grimly. You remember Amanda Sullivan, she asked. Award-winning investigative journalist? The one who's been looking into illegal adoptions in Texas for the past year? Victoria's nostrils flared. She knows everything, Lauren continued, her voice like a knife slicing through the air. She's downstairs right now. And the police? She gestured toward the window. They'll be here any minute. For the first time, Victoria looked afraid. Her gaze flickered wildly between them, calculating her next move. And then, her mask shattered. She lunged for the folder, but Jake was faster. He snatched it up before she could reach it, holding it out of her grasp. No, he said, his voice unshakable. No more lies. No more games. This ends now. Victoria let out a scream of pure frustration, her face twisting with rage. You think you've won? She hissed, her voice shaking. You think you can just take everything from me? She laughed, a wild, desperate sound. I made you, she spat at Jake. You wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for me. And you... She turned on Lauren, her eyes burning with hatred. You're nothing but a pathetic little orphan, just like your father. Do you really think the world will care about your story? Lauren didn't flinch. Jake didn't back down. A siren wailed in the distance. Victoria froze, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The reality of the situation hit her like a tidal wave. She had lost. The front doors of the Marshall estate burst open. Footsteps thundered through the hall. Then, the voice of an officer. Victoria Marshall, put your hands where we can see them. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Her face drained of color. Jake exhaled. It was over. The officers stormed in, and Victoria screamed, thrashing wildly as they grabbed her arms and forced her to the ground. This isn't over, she shrieked. You hear me? This isn't over. I'll take you all down with me. Jake watched, his pulse pounding in his ears, as the woman who had stolen his life was dragged away in handcuffs. For years she had controlled him, manipulated him, made him believe he owed her his life. But now, He was finally free. He took a deep breath and turned to Lauren. She was watching him carefully as if waiting to see what he would say next. His voice was steady when he finally spoke. "My name is Jake." Lauren's eyes softened. Jake turned to the officers. "I want to give my statement," he said. "I want to tell the truth." For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the past, because he had just reclaimed his future. Victoria Marshall had spent years building her empire on deceit, but in the end, her lies became her undoing. With irrefutable evidence of fraud, murder, and illegal adoptions, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No amount of money or manipulation could save her now. For Lauren, justice didn't stop there. After a grueling legal battle, she reclaimed the inheritance that had rightfully belonged to her father, Daniel Carter. The fortune Victoria had stolen to build her luxurious lifestyle was now back where it belonged, with his daughter. But for Lauren, it wasn't about wealth. It was about restoring her father's legacy. Brandon, now fully embracing his true identity as Jake, made the most important decision of his life. He walked away from the Marshall estate, leaving behind the name, the privilege, and the lies he had been forced to live with. The home that had once promised security had been nothing more than a golden cage, and he was finally free. Standing together outside the courthouse, Lauren and Jake felt something they hadn't in years: hope. They had spent so much of their lives trapped in the shadows of their past, driven by pain and vengeance. But now they saw a future beyond their suffering. "I thought I wanted revenge," Lauren admitted softly, looking at Jake. "But what I really wanted was justice, and a life beyond all of this." Jake nodded, his expression one of quiet determination. "And we have that now. We get to decide what comes next." Hand in hand, they walked away, not just from the courthouse, but from the ghosts that had haunted them for so long. Their pasts had shaped them, but they would not define them. A new chapter awaited, and this time, they would write it on their own terms. The Texas sun hung low in the sky as Jake and Lauren stood at the edge of the landfill, the scent of dust and damp earth filling the air. The place had changed. Some of the makeshift homes were gone, replaced by sturdier structures, but the weight of their past still lingered here, embedded in every piece of discarded debris. Jake swallowed hard. It had been years since he had last stood in this place, but his body still remembered it. The cold nights, the hunger, the desperation, and Linda. "She's still here," Lauren whispered beside him, her voice laced with emotion. Ahead, near a small patched-up shelter, a woman bent down to comfort a crying child. Though her hair had turned gray and her movements were slower than before, her presence was just as strong as they remembered. Linda. At first, she didn't notice them. She was too focused on the small boy in front of her, gently wiping the dirt from his cheeks as she murmured something comforting. But when she finally lifted her head, her breath caught. She froze, blinking as if she couldn't believe her own eyes. "Linda?" Lauren called softly, stepping forward. The woman's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears forming instantly. Lauren rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly. "You came back," Linda's voice cracked. Jake took a deep breath and approached slowly. Linda's gaze shifted to him, her eyes filled with something between shock and overwhelming joy. "You," she breathed. "My boy. My Jake." She didn't hesitate. She pulled him into her arms, her frail frame somehow strong enough to hold on to him like she had never let go. For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. He had spent so many years believing he had left this place behind, believing he had no connection to it anymore. But standing here, with Linda's hands gripping his shoulders, he realized something. He had never truly left. Tears burned behind his eyes as he whispered, "I missed you." Linda let out a small, choked laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You came back," she repeated, like she was trying to convince herself it was real. "And look at you." She reached up, cupping his face with calloused hands. "You made it, Jake." Jake swallowed around the lump in his throat. "I did," he said, "but I didn't come back just to visit." Linda frowned slightly, her tired eyes searching his. Lauren stepped in, her voice full of warmth. "We want to help," she said. "We're going to build something here, something that will give these kids a chance." Jake nodded. "A community center, a real place where they can be safe, learn, and grow. No more surviving in the shadows. Linda's eyes widened. But how? She asked. Jake turned, looking back toward the street where a row of sleek black SUVs had just pulled up. The doors opened, and Robert and Susan Walker stepped out, along with a team of volunteers, architects, and city officials. Susan approached, her gentle eyes taking in the scene. "So this is where you grew up?" she murmured. Jake nodded. "We're here to help," Robert said with a smile. "Lauren and Jake have some big plans, and we're going to make sure they happen." Linda let out a small gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. "You mean, you're serious?" she whispered. Lauren took Linda's hands in hers. "We have the resources," she said. "We have the connections, and we're not going anywhere." Jake's voice was steady, determined. "I used to think the only way to escape my past was to erase it," he admitted. "But now I know. That's not true. The best way to move forward is to give back." The kids who had been watching from a distance slowly crept closer, their curious, hopeful eyes taking in the scene. One of the younger boys tugged at Jake's sleeve. "Mister, are you really going to help us?" he asked, his small voice uncertain. Jake knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze. "I promise," he said. "No one gets left behind." Tears slipped down Linda's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "You too," she said, shaking her head. "You were always meant for something bigger." Lauren squeezed Jake's hand. "And it starts now." Behind them, the city officials and volunteers were already moving, marking out plans for construction. Within weeks, the landfill would begin its transformation into something it had never been before, a place of hope. The warm Texas sun bathed the newly built Walker Community Center in golden light as laughter and chatter filled the air. Families, volunteers, city officials, and dozens of children roamed the grounds, marveling at what had once been a place of despair, now transformed into a haven of hope. Lauren stood at the entrance, watching with a heart full of emotion as kids ran through the brand new playground, their giggles echoing through the crisp morning air. Others gathered in the center's classrooms, where volunteers taught them how to read, write, and dream of a future beyond survival. Beside her, Jake took a deep breath, hands in his pockets. He looked sharp in his navy suit, a stark contrast to the boy who had once dug through trash for food. But today, he wasn't just Brandon Marshall, the businessman. Today, he was Jake, the same Jake who had once held her hand in the landfill and promised he would come back, and he had. Lauren turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I can't believe we made it through all of this." Jake's fingers tightened around her hand. "Yes," he whispered, "and we did it. Together." They had fought their way out of the darkness, but instead of being consumed by anger, they had turned their pain into purpose. Nearby, Linda wiped away a tear of pride as she watched the children she had once cared for, now stepping into a brighter future. Robert and Susan Walker stood with her, smiling as they spoke to city officials about future expansions, scholarships, housing, career training. The community center wasn't just a building. It was a second chance, a lifeline, a promise that no child would be left behind again. Jake's gaze landed on a small glass display case inside the lobby, where two items rested side by side. His old toy car, the one Lauren had found for him years ago, still scratched and worn, but never forgotten. And Lauren's tattered teddy bear, the only piece of her father she had managed to hold on to. They weren't just relics of the past. They were reminders that, no matter how broken something seemed, it could be rebuilt. Lauren smiled, her eyes shining. "We're not victims anymore," she said. Jake nodded, looking out at the life they had built. "No," he agreed, "we're survivors." And as the children's laughter continued to ring through the air, they knew their story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, resilience, and the power of never giving up. If there's one truth in life, it's this: pain is inevitable, but what we do with it defines us. Lauren and Jake's journey wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming their own lives. They could have let anger consume them, let the past dictate their future. But instead, they chose healing over hatred, action over resentment. Because in the end, revenge is just a fleeting moment of satisfaction. But building something greater than yourself, that's real power. Lauren could have walked away after bringing Victoria to justice, but she didn't. Jake could have drowned in guilt for forgetting his past, but he didn't. Instead, they turned their suffering into strength. They built a legacy, not out of pain, but out of purpose. And that's the greatest lesson of all. No matter how broken your story begins, you have the power to rewrite the ending. Maybe you've faced betrayal. Maybe you've been abandoned. Maybe you've been told that your past defines you, but it doesn't. What defines you is what you do next. So ask yourself, what would you have done in Lauren's place? Would you have sought revenge? Or would you have chosen something even stronger? Redemption? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories. Because the past is written in ink, but the future, that's in your hands.